Hello, and welcome to another episode of Finding Mr. Hyde, the podcast. I'm your host, Allie Jackson, and I'm bringing you my positive and practical approach to dating, relationships, and a whole lot else about life from my lived experience. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. I have been getting so many questions lately when I do my Ask Me Anything question boxes on Instagram about moving in with a partner. Moving in together, or we're already living together, and people are struggling or wondering how I've approached things with Skyline. And we're about 9 months into living together now. So have a lot of learnings from those 9 months and thought that I would do a dedicated episode for this topic with not only my learnings, but also some of the insights and advice that I've gotten from both guests and listeners in Storytime episodes over the last year or so. Because back when Skyline and I were about to move in together, I actually did 3 listener storytime episodes as bonus episodes on the Patreon. So shout out to the Patreon. You can go and hear those 3 different listeners' perspectives about moving in with their partner. They were super, super practical and very helpful for me, honestly, because at that point I was a couple weeks from moving in with him. And then Skyline and I, as you probably know, did a public pod episode right before we moved in together about ways that we were preparing, things we were thinking about, how we were hoping to set things up. So I have some updates and hindsights, reflections, whatever you want to call it, on some of those things, weaving in questions that I got from you all. And as I outlined this episode, I realized I was outlining at least 2 episodes. So this is probably going to be part 1, not probably. This is part 1 of not sure how many parts yet, though, depending on if more questions from you come in. But today, from a roadmap perspective, here's what you can expect. Today is like the machinery, money, protecting yourselves going in, who's going to do what. Like the more, I would say, functional, more objective pieces potentially of moving in together and of living with someone. And then the next part is going to be things that are a little bit harder to plan for, things that you could definitely not try to talk about, but definitely talk about in advance, but that just might be a little bit more subjective, a little bit more based on what ends up happening in your experience when you live together. Things like sharing a space with another person for potentially the first time for some people. Having different versions of what clean means, because that is sometimes difficult to talk about before it's actually happening. Merging your stuff, like little petty things that happen. We're going to talk about that. So I'm really excited to get into this topic. And before I do, a couple updates on my end. Speaking of the Patreon, something that I have started over there is really documenting a new therapy journey that I'm on. As you know, I had a podcast guest on the pod back in last fall, Mandy Dixon. She is a therapist who specifically specializes in the cross-section between ADHD and perimenopause in women and adult ADHD diagnoses as a result. That episode was truly a game changer for me and how I was thinking about my own mental health journey, my own hormonal journey, all sorts of things. And it kicked off a couple of also bonus episodes on the Patreon on that topic, both my own thoughts as I'm entering or maybe already in perimenopause, and also a listener story time from a woman who was diagnosed with ADHD at age, 37 it was. So that has been percolating in my mind for the last 8-9 months as I've been trying to figure out why the systems that used to really work for me, both in my work and personal life, seem to be broken now. And the coping mechanisms, as I now realize they are, that used to work for me no longer work. And I put some more systems in place on my own over the last several months. But one of the things that I really began to realize is that the therapist that I had been seeing wasn't really equipped to kind of guide me on that journey towards potentially an ADHD diagnosis, maybe something totally different, maybe no diagnosis at all, just like better, more targeted therapy towards those types of things. So I found a new practice and therapy group and now individual therapist who we are calling Megan over on the Patreon, who specializes in these things, similar to Mandy, but in New York. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm talking all about it on the Patreon, both in specific, but there are some things that are private, but definitely thematically, things that I'm learning every week, things, reframes my therapist has brought to me, work that I'm doing, all that stuff. So I'm really excited about that. You can find it all at patreon.com/finding Mr. Height. I'm really pumped about it. So that is one of the things that has been sort of occupying my brain space for the last couple of weeks, because I'm in kind of intake mode with that new therapist. We're 2 sessions in, and this most recent session was actually less about historical context and more about some shit that's going on in my life currently. My uncle passed away about a week ago as we speak, and that's been really difficult. So for, my larger extended family. So a lot of stuff came up in that session about historical context regarding grief as well. But that's kind of what's been going on with me. That's what was happening over 4th of July weekend for those who follow me on Instagram and kind of saw that I had been offline for a few days. I appreciate everybody's well wishes and love. So that's what happened. But I went into much more detail about that on the Patreon. And that's really what's been up with me lately, is this therapy journey. Like, that's where I've been spending a lot of my mental space. And I am excited, though, to bring you this moving in together content in at least 2 really targeted, bucketed places. First, I want to open it up with our media mention for the week. And that is going to be a book that I absolutely love. It is sitting behind me on my bookshelf, Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. The book came out in 2019, so it's fairly recent. And I think it really gives a nice vocabulary for this whole topic. It definitely gave me a great vocabulary for a lot of the things that we're about to talk about. Mind you, I read it, as I mentioned, in 2019, before I'd ever lived with a partner. I think at the time that I bought it, I was with ASV, if I remember correctly. And because we were middle distance, long distance, whatever you want to call it, we were spending a lot of time in each other's individual spaces. And that's what originally kind of brought me to this concept and this book, is because although we didn't live together, we were spending extended periods of time living together, especially because I could work remotely. And so I would go down to his place in Philly for a week and work from there, as he was not able to work remotely. He worked in a hospital. So some of these concepts, even though it was his place and I was technically a visitor, some of these concepts were already coming up. So that's where I was first introduced to this book. And what it really does is it takes the invisible, often unequally split labor of running a home that mostly lands on women, stereotypically speaking, and it makes it more of, I would say, a usable system. And one idea that I really love from it is that every task related to the home is like a card in a deck, and whoever is holding that card owns the whole thing. Noticing that something needs to be done, planning how it's going to get done, and then actually doing the thing. And the second that you're only doing something when asked, I guess to put it a different way, if somebody has to deal you that card and hand it to you every time, then your partner is still holding the card. So, and there are so many relationships where one partner is holding most of the deck at all times and dealing out cards to the other partner. And that is not fair play, as the book kind of talks about it. And one of the reasons that it was brought up for me in talking about today's topic is because one of the listener questions that I got was how to avoid feeling like a mom assigning chores to her kid when you're living with a partner. And it's the backbone, that kind of concept is the backbone of how I recommend splitting up labor, which we'll talk about later in the episode. 2 more things, though, kind of vocab-wise, to talk about from this book that I really love. One is that all time is created equal. And 2 is that everyone needs protected space for their own pursuits. The first, all time is created equal, I think it is one of, I think, the biggest sources of tension in a lot of couples who spend their time really differently when it comes to work. So that could look like one partner who works outside of the home and one partner who works inside of the home. And that could lead to resentment or misalignment or lack of fair play, as the case may be, because perhaps the partner who works outside of the home doesn't understand why the partner who works inside of the home isn't able to take care of more things at home because they're there all day. And I'm putting that in quotes, but like they're working. It's not the same as if they're just like, they're not sitting around, right? They just happen to be in the home, but they're not sitting around all day. They are working. And that time is created equally to the other time. But then there's also partnerships where perhaps one partner goes to a job or works like a more typical, salaried job, let's say, and the other partner is a full-time parent, a stay-at-home parent. Their time is still just as equal and valuable as the partner who is going to the corporate job, even if that job is at home. So there's that piece. And then there's the part about each person needing protected space for their different pursuits and like respecting what that is for each person. The book is really, really good. I highly recommend it. There are so many think pieces about this concept and this book, clips on social media, places you can find more information on it. I highly recommend it. Let's get into, though, the various aspects of like the nuts and bolts, let's say, of moving in with somebody, framed by your questions, things that you guys are actually wondering. The first theme that really came up in all of the questions that I received was about money, like probably the number one topic that people are asking about. So as we mentioned, when we did the episode about us moving in together, we planned to do a split share 50-50 expenses. And it didn't really change. Like our perspective wasn't changed by the fact that I own the condo and Skyline was moving into a place that I own. That turned out to be true. Like in our experience, owning the place didn't really change the math for us. We split shared expenses the same as if we were renting. Like we predicted that pre-move and it held. One thing that I think is really, really key in that is both people understanding what the before and after could look like. And we mentioned in that conversation a cohabitation agreement. And I think that is so key to getting on the same page. And if you don't want to actually sign one, which I very much recommend, but if you don't want to actually sign one, at least having the conversation of what each of you are planning to put into your cohabitation expenses from like either whether it's rent, mortgage, etc., and then what that might look like were the relationship to end. There are parts of if one partner owns the home, there are parts of the expenses of that are going to look very different from if you're renting. So there's of course your mortgage payment, or perhaps your mortgage payment. Maybe there are people out there who don't have a mortgage. Jealous. But there's your mortgage payment, which can more be equated to rent, right? Like it's one payment that you send out every month. And you want to talk to your partner about what that looks like in terms of how you're going to share it. Because something that you are doing when you are paying a mortgage is you are building equity. Again, it depends on how your mortgage is set up. But typically speaking, you are building equity in the home that you live in. And the question I think you have to ask yourselves, and as the homeowner, I would probably do this individually from my partner and would want them to do it individually too. And then we come together and talk about it. Do you want to treat it purely financially as if your partner is now your tenant? Obviously you're in a relationship, it's different, right? But financially, the way that you're setting it up, do you want to treat it as if your partner is your tenant? Or do you want to treat it as if your partner is more in a rent to own type of scenario where they are actually building equity with the amount that they are paying you? Two extremely valid approaches that the two of you need to align on. And again, back to the cohabitation agreement, you would put it in there because it will mean something different if you move out. And like I said, I think that those two approaches are equally valid. But if you choose the second approach, where your partner is building equity with the mortgage payments that they contribute or with the payments that they contribute, then you need to keep track of what that is and how much of what they are paying is going towards equity, because mortgages also have interest, right? So your whole payment's not going towards your principal. And that is going to need to be kept track of so that if you need to use that clause in your cohabitation agreement, if there comes a time at some point where you are no longer living together, or where you're going to sell that home, it's going to be important that you're keeping track of how much equity that partner now has in the house or in the home, because they've been doing like a rent to own type of thing. And that can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be like straight equity dollar for dollar. Like you can set it up however you want. Or on the flip side, in a cleaner way, as long as it works for everyone, it could just be considered rent, right? Like if you're renting a place, you don't get anything if you leave. You just leave. Like the rent that you paid is gone. And you could set it up that same way. That would be equally valid. So, but that's just that one payment. There are many other things that come in when you own a home that don't when you're renting. Maybe you have HOA fees. What's that look like? Maybe what if something like you have your repairs that are sort of like every day, like maybe you have to have a plumber come, or maybe you have to have an electrician come and, fix littler things. What is going to happen though if you have a major expense? How are you going to handle that? And the way that Skyline and I decided to do it is that we said that we were going to have everything 50-50. And if it is something related to like really significantly improving the value of the house, so I'm not talking like fix a pipe because the toilet broke. I'm talking like we're going to redo the kitchen. That would then be increasing the value of the house. And therefore that's involved in like his equity from like a rent to own perspective. We have not done anything like that to date. Knock on everything. We have not had anything major go wrong in the house since he moved in. I actually haven't had anything major go wrong since I moved in. So we haven't had to deal with that like big expense. We've only had those littler things. Like we had a plumber come, we had someone come clean out our HVAC system, like that kind of thing. But that is the kind of thing that I think if I could go back, that I would talk more to Skyline about the everyday expenses that surprised me when I became a homeowner, that somebody who has always rented might not be thinking of in terms of like their housing expenses when they were renting was just their rent. And you have a super who comes, right? Like, at least in New York, if your fridge breaks, if your electricity goes out, if, the plumbing stops working, if your toilet's clogged and you can't fix it yourself, like all of these things, a super will just come and handle it for you. And there's no extra charge for that, at least in all the buildings that I've rented in New York. And that changes drastically when you're a homeowner. And I knew that in theory when I moved in, but I was constantly reminded when little things would happen, like a hinge came off of one of the cabinets in my kitchen, for example, or I don't have a ladder personally that is tall enough to change light bulbs in the ceiling in my bedroom. I had to borrow a ladder from a neighbor that luckily they had, but if they did not have that ladder, I would have had to pay someone to come do it. These things surprised me when I became a homeowner. And in hindsight, if I were moving in with Skyline again, if Skyline were moving in here again, I kind of forgot that. And I would go through these types of things with him and be like, these are the types of expenses that might come up. It hasn't been an issue, but it just would have been easier, I think, if I'd been like, listen, there's a lot of stuff that comes up when you're a homeowner that you don't even think about when you're a renter. Here are the types of things that surprised me. And we're going to need to put money aside for the year for these little random things to come up. Like I have a line item in my budget for home repairs that I never needed to have before. And it's very fluctuating, right? Like I'll put X amount in for the year in the budget, and I usually spend it all across like 1 or maybe 2 months because it happens, in groups. It's not like a monthly expense that you have. So that's been fairly seamless for us to navigate together, but it is something that I wish that I had been like, hey, this is a thing. So if you, for the people who asked about already owning your home and somebody moving in, like that's something that I would really recommend. And if you're curious for more sort of practical advice on cohabitation agreements, one of those Patreon listener story times that I did with a listener named Anita talked all about the specific cohabitation agreement conversations that she and her partner had. And it was really, really, really fascinating to hear how she was kind of thinking about it. I think prenups get talked about a lot in today's day and age, and they are very common. Cohabitation agreements don't, and I think they should. So I really, really loved that episode. I'm going to put the links of all the episodes I'm talking about in the show notes of this episode, and they're all available on the Patreon. So the other thing that comes up with money and sharing expenses is like, where's that money come from? And how are you going to like pay for things on a more day-to-day basis? We talked about this in that episode. I'm obviously self-employed. Skyline is not. At the time when we moved in together, we made about the same. Both of our incomes, though, vary pretty wildly per month. Mine because I'm self-employed. So now it's more consistent now than it was when we moved in together because all of my clients are on retainer now. So it's fairly steady, but that could change overnight, right? Like all my clients could decide they don't need me anymore. Skyline is in sales. And so a lot of his compensation is commission-based, which is not an even monthly thing. And it's also not something that's the same amount every time he gets a commission check. You can kind of predict it and forecast it, but it's not the same amount. So what we decided to do because of that is think about our annual projections and then deal with or decide on our split based on that. And so based on that at the time, we went with 50-50. And what we decided to do was to review it annually, unless one of us like throughout the year was like, I think this is becoming like skewed. And so far that's been working for us. We are still 50-50. We both feel really good about it. We talk about like still good in like our stand-ups, our kind of check-ins. And we both feel great about that still. Here's what has changed from how we thought we were going to set things up to how we ended up setting things up. So we talked about how I was going to be the CFO, and that is still true. I am the CFO, Chief Financial Officer of the relationship. I fucking love it. I love budgeting. I know that's weird, but I love budgeting. There's a reason that I got into the very numbers heavy area of work that I did. I love it. I love a spreadsheet. I love a forecast. I love a formula. I love all of that stuff. And because of my business and my businesses, I already have a very, very detailed setup in QuickBooks where I am tagging literally every single expense that comes in. I am tagging it as one business or the other business or personal. And then under that, what within those businesses or within my personal, like what category did it fall into? Because the highest level of tagging, business, personal, is like required for the business setup that I have. And then within the businesses, it also is required to tag it as like what it was in terms of what my accountant needs. But I like to go even more detailed because I like to feed my budget spreadsheet to be very granular. I like to budget out at a very low level of detail and like see and assess my spending at a very low level of detail. And I love doing it. I tag in QuickBooks, I'm not shitting you, literally every day. It's also easier that way because it's easier to remember what you spent yesterday and only tag a couple things. And it's just part of my morning routine, but I love it. I get actually very excited on a Monday because I have the weekend's worth of spending and I have more than one day. Or if we were on vacation and I didn't tag things, I know it's weird, but I get really excited. So I'm already doing that. So what he and I thought we were going to do is have a shared account, a joint account that we each fund based on the split that we've decided on, which at the time was 50-50. And that we would then pull all of our joint expenses from that account. In practice, we tried that. And in practice, what ended up working better is actually keeping all of our money separate, but using the tagging system that I was already doing, adding a layer that is joint and a tag rather that is joint and a tag that is him, and adding that into my tagging. It takes me like probably 10% more time to do it. I was already tagging joint, and so to tag his. So what that now means is that we have all of our individual accounts flowing into one QuickBooks space, and then I can export what's relevant for my accountants. And I then tag from there. So the way that my spreadsheets work, and I updated my spreadsheets to work like this, and it was a very fun few days. The way my spreadsheets work is they look at all of the things that I've tagged as joint, who paid for those things, because we each have individual cards still. We ended up deciding not to get a joint card. We have a couple of cards we have each other as additional users, but we don't really have joint cards. We have our individual cards. So my spreadsheet looks at, okay, here's this joint expense. Like, let's say we went out to dinner. Who paid for it? Okay, Skyline put it on his Amex. But it tags it as joint. And then all of the joint things, it knows, okay, of this amount of money that was spent on joint things in the month of June, Allie paid for this much of it, Skyline paid for this much of it. So who owes who? And we're able to handle that with like account transfers. Like we're not Venmoing. We're just doing kind of like account transfers for whoever's going to have to pay the credit card bills of the joint things. It is admittedly a little bit of a complicated system versus if we just had a joint account, but I love it. It's working so well for us, in part because it means that we get to, and again, this is such a nerdy thing to say, but it means that we get to maximize our credit card reward spending and use the credit card across all of our credit cards that the two of us have, because there are some that he has that I don't and vice versa. We're able to optimize our credit card reward spending to put the joint things on the card that makes the most sense and not put all of our joint things on one particular card just because they are joint things. And I love that. And it does make it more complicated, but I love it. So that is how we ended up setting things up rather than having the joint account that we thought we were going to have. And somebody else asked a question, what if 50-50 doesn't feel fair? And that is where I want to re-emphasize that our 50-50 split is based on, at the time, our projected proportional income. That was 50-50. Like we make about the same amount of money. So that's why we have the 50-50 split and why I think it's important to continue to reevaluate if that changes, because particularly for somebody like me who's self-employed, that could change. But also maybe one of us gets like maybe the corporate person gets a bomb promotion and now they're making 3x what the other person makes. Are we still going to be 50-50? Is that still going to feel fair? Probably not. And people's income changes over the course of your life. So I just think whatever you decide to do, that it's really, really important that you have sort of like contained spaces available to evaluate that and talk about it. That's why I love the stand-ups. That's why I, call them relationship check-ins, whatever you want to call them. That's why I love that, because it gives you the space to talk about something that is or isn't working without feeling like you have to bring it up out of nowhere, because you're supposed to be talking about it at that time in that space. And I think that just makes it so much easier. So the split is like a proposal. It's not a life sentence. Like you're not like, oh, we're going to 50-50 forever. And if I decide that I want to take a lower paying job because I want to spend more time at home, like if we have kids, then I'm going to feel like 50-50. Like it's all negotiable, right? It's all things that you can continue to talk about. And that is what we will continue to do. But I was thinking about like, what are the things that have changed since we had that conversation, and the way that we're like paying for things has changed. I really like it. It probably wouldn't work great for people though that aren't already using a very detailed budgeting system or like an expense tagging system, because it's definitely not the most streamlined. So I think for people who are not already doing that, I would recommend a joint credit card or a joint bank account or something like that, just because it's easier and you don't have to start from scratch in terms of all these systems. But I already had them and I was literally excited to build them out. Okay, so the next sort of big logistical thing is chores. The mental load of those chores, the things that have to happen in the house. And like I said, so many people asked about this, and a couple people in particular made the parallel of feeling like a mom asking a child to do chores in their relationship. And somebody else wrote in like worried that would happen. She was like about to move in with her partner. And she's like, I've heard horror stories of women feeling like they're the mom in the relationship, just like, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And it like ruins their relationship dynamic. People are really worried about that. And I think that's a very real fear. Not that one partner's not going to do the work, but that remembering it and assigning it starts to feel like the other partner's job and builds resentment. And remembering, I think, is the biggest invisible task. Like we talked about this in our original episode, the cat's water fountains. That is something that as a cat owner and a person who has had cat water fountains for a long time, I just know needs to happen. But a person who hasn't had cats doesn't think about that, right? Like these water fountains that I'm like, oh yeah, every 2 weeks you clean the water fountains. And he's like, what? Because he doesn't have cats, right? So it's that invisibility of like, let's name all of the things that need to happen. So here's a framework that I think is super helpful. And we didn't do in full before we moved in together, but I think if I could go back, I would. And I really recommend this framework, especially if you are in a spot where you're feeling like you're already in this place where there's this mismatch and you're already feeling it. But I would do it before that even happens. But if you're already in this place, I think this could be really helpful. So each person writes down a comprehensive, exhaustive list of all of the things that are two categories: required for the house to run and desired for the house to run. And those are two very different categories. And one of the things that you will likely find out through the course of your conversation is that you don't even agree about what things go in what category. So let me define these categories. Required are the non-negotiables, the things that absolutely have to happen in order to keep the home functioning, regardless of like taste or preference. So those are things like, if you have pets, feeding the pets, paying the rent, paying the electricity bill or the internet bill. Things that, like, if you don't do this thing, it will be very, very bad. Like, you absolutely have to. Your pets must eat. The electricity must stay on. These are things that are absolutely required. I haven't mentioned things that I actually think are in the desired category that some people might think are in the required category, but like, this should be non-negotiables. And then the desired category are more about taste and standards than they are about actual requirements. So these are things that are like keeping the counters tidy, or deep cleaning on a weekly basis, or making the bed. And some people might put, for example, making the bed into their required category. They're like, no, it's required to make our bed. Technically it's not, right? But some people are going to see it that way. And that's why it is so important, I think, to do these lists separately and make them exhaustive. No task is too small, because one of the other things that's going to come out of this most likely is that there are going to be tasks on each of your lists that are not on the other person's at all in either category, because it's not something that they considered. So like, if Skyline and I had done this before we had that water fountain conversation, that probably wouldn't have been on his list. And there are certainly things on his list that wouldn't have been on mine. And that is the first thing to notice. What are the things that are on one person's list and not the other? I can think of one thing that will probably be on my required list, but maybe not on his, and that's watering the plants. Because I love having plants, and therefore, for me, that's required, because I want a house that has a lot of plants, and that requires you to water them. But technically, that is not a required thing for a household to run. It is only required if you are a household who wants to have plants. One example. So you have all these things, right? Now you got to figure out who's going to do them. One of the quotes that I don't remember where I heard for the first time, but that I love is, if it's everybody's job, it's no one's job. And I think I maybe heard it in the context of like work and corporate life to start. It is so relevant here, because the next step of this conversation after you have these things outlined is to talk about who's going to do each of them. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the same person all the time, but that is a concept in fair play, which we'll talk about. It's also called the 0-100 method, which Skyline and I use for a lot of things in our home. But it doesn't have to mean that only one person does it all the time. It does have to mean, though, that there is very clear ownership expectations. And this is especially important for those required tasks that like have to happen. The fair play method is to give one person full ownership of holding that card from beginning to end. And that starts with remembering it needs to be done, and it ends with actually doing the thing. And it includes all the things in between. So like, laundry is a non-negotiable, right? That's on the required list. Doesn't mean you have to do it. Doesn't mean somebody in the home has to do it, because there are ways to outsource it, but it is a required thing. You must clean your clothes. So whoever, if it's one person, whoever's holding that laundry card, they need to both realize that they need to realize that laundry needs to be done. They need to make sure that the things to do laundry are available, detergent, for example. Then they need to do the laundry. And then they need to potentially, if this is part of the task you've outlined, put that laundry away. Now, here's where we start to get into desired territory, right? Because like, folding and putting away is not technically required. Most people would say, yeah, it is. But it like technically, right? It would work if they were on the floor. We don't want that, but it would work. So it's about talking about that stuff. And I think this is where the mental load can silently pile onto one person, is when the ownership of that thing is not super clear. One thing that is also really important before going into this conversation that I should have mentioned up top is that a table stakes part of this working is that both people really want it to work, is that both people really want the other person to feel heard, to feel valued, and to feel like things are equitable in the home. If that's not the case, it is going to be very, very difficult to make any of this work. And so that's the table stakes, like bare minimum requirement in order for all of this to go well, is that both of you are on the same page about that. That doesn't mean you're going to agree about everything you talk about, but it means that you agree, at least in concept, that we want to get to a place where both of us feel really equitable about what's happening and both of us feel really good about where we land. Like, we want that. And we care about the other person's feelings in that conversation. That's going to be super important. And I think it's especially important to establish as a kind of ground rule if you were already in a dynamic where one person is feeling resentful. So for the people who ask those questions about feeling like a mom assigning chores to their kid, that is going to be a really important base place, foundation to start with, that like, hey, I want us to both feel good about how we work in our home. I want us to both feel like this is equitable and fair and good. Do you agree? If the answer is no, then like that's like a sort of a larger problem, not sort of. So assigning owners. I think that the 0-100 method is the best place to start for pretty much the entire list, unless you already know that it is going to work to have shared ownership. And 0-100 is just another way of saying one person is 100% holding the card, the other person is 0% holding the card. And so like the budget is a good example of that. I am the CFO. I fully 100% own our budget. Fully. An example on Skyline's end, he owns stuff with the car. We had to do something with the title recently with the registration. Like, that is fully on him. I don't even know. I think I'm on the emails, but I don't even know what's happening with the car. Fully his. That, I think, is the easiest place to start when you're outlining and sort of assigning things on this list, because sharing tasks gets murky quickly if you're not on the same page about how those tasks get shared. So there are things, many things that Skyline and I now share, but that started out, we talked about them fully split. There are also things that went the other way. So like, I'll give you an example of the last one. So we didn't assign an owner initially for scooping litter and also for the aforementioned cleaning of water fountains, and the litter boxes have to get cleaned out about once a month, like fully cleaned out, not just scooped. Scooped every day, but fully cleaned out like once a month. Literally like, I don't know, a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the litter boxes need to get cleaned out soon. I mentioned I cleaned them out last month, and we'd previously been kind of operating for both of these tasks on like a switch off kind of basis. I mentioned last month that it is my least favorite thing that I have to do. This is also on the required list. My least favorite thing that I have to do in the home, this has been true since I owned cats, is clean out these fucking litter boxes. I actually don't mind scooping. Fully cleaning them out, I hate it. I hate it. It's one of the reasons why I've never considered a litter robot, because it doesn't actually remove the thing that I don't like. I don't mind scooping. I hate fully cleaning them out. It's disgusting. I hate it. Skyline hates scooping. Literally the opposite. But we've never really talked about that. It just sort of randomly came up. And then I said I would happily scoop the litter every single day if I never had to do a monthly clean out ever again. And he was like, great. What? So that's what we do now. But if we'd gone through like that before, we probably wouldn't have even realized that that was going to be the case. This is the benefit of continuing to talk about things and continuing to evaluate whether things are working. And so if you are in a place where you are already feeling super resentful or you're worried that it might go that way, I really recommend the 0-100 method for almost everything to start. And then you can start to see, are there things that make more sense for us to share? Like something that Skyline and I fully share, and we don't even keep track of it at all, is cooking. Both of us really like to cook. Both of us enjoy it. And it has worked for us that it's like whoever's available. If we're cooking for both of us, if we're both free, we'll cook together, like we'll make dinner together. If one person is still working and the other person is hungry and they're like, hey, you're going to be done in like 30 minutes, I'll start dinner, then they'll fully do dinner. One person will do both breakfasts. We don't really have a set system about who's going to cook. We started off deciding that we were going to switch off meal prepping breakfasts. Like I would do it all one week, he would do it all the next week. And we ended up realizing that was too rigid for us. And we wanted to kind of be more loosey-goosey about who's cooking, but stay very close on whether that was working. And it is. We don't really talk about who's going to cook when. And it hasn't really been an issue in terms of like, oh, I always feel like I'm cooking, or I always feel like I'm doing the dishes, because we share the cooking, we also share the dishes. It's more like oh, the dishwasher was full, so I emptied it because I was in the kitchen and I had a couple minutes. And that's working really well for us. But again, if you were in a place where you were already feeling that resentment and that misalignment, it's probably best to start with a much more defined role for each person and each task. There were also a bunch of questions about having different understandings of what clean means. And this is where we start to get into that desired category, where it's, like I said, taste and standard driven, and having different definitions of what something looks like. In these situations, I think assigning rigidly is going to be really hard. And what's important instead is to calibrate. Figure out, okay, we each have this standard. Define it. What does the kitchen being clean mean to you? Does it mean that there's nothing on the countertops? Like, not only is everything like clean in terms of we've wiped down the countertops and there's nothing like gross on them, but it also means that there's literally nothing on the counter and everything is put away in its proper cabinets and everything is wiped down. Like, what does it mean to you that the kitchen is clean? What does it mean to you that our bedroom is clean? Does it mean the bed is made? Does it mean that all the clothes are put away? What does that mean to each of us? And then how can we calibrate which standard or blend of standards we're going to live at? An example of kind of like different levels of clean, I really find it helpful when my bed is made, even though I don't even see it because it's upstairs now. I had previously gotten myself into a habit of making my bed every day. And that's something that's really important to me. I'm not always as good at it, but I really try and it's really important to me. And it's not something that's as important to Skyline, but because that's really important to me, we now are on the same page that whoever gets out of bed second is going to make the bed. And if we get out of bed at the same time, we do it together. But that has worked really well for us in calibrating, okay, we're going to be at my standard where we make the bed every day. There are other things. Here's an example on his end. It drives him absolutely nutty. We mentioned this before. If cabinet doors are open. I'm looking in the kitchen right now. I don't think I left one open. Shit, fuck. All right. But it drives him batty if cabinet doors are open. Me, I don't care. I don't care at all. I don't even notice them. But that is an example of we live at his standard, where I really, really work hard to close all the cabinets at all times so that he feels more comfortable that it is at his standard. But you got to calibrate. You got to talk about what are our different standards and how are we going to figure out which one it is, or a compromise between the two. And sometimes whoever wants to live at that higher standard is going to own more of closing that gap. So for example, I lived with a roommate years ago who had a much higher level of clean than I did in terms of her standard. Like, she wanted to be deep cleaning all the time. I literally never want to be deep cleaning. We ended up outsourcing that and hiring a housekeeper to come and do that for us. And I continued that when I moved out by myself because I realized, wow, I really do like when everything is more sparkling than I would do myself, but I do not want to do it myself. I don't want to spend time doing that. I would rather spend money to outsource it. And that's something I talked to Skyline about before he moved in. I was like, I have this person who comes. I love her. And if that wasn't something that he wanted to contribute towards because he would rather do it himself or rather have a different level of standard, then we would talk about that. But I think if I were the person who was categorically like, no, I want this person to come on this cadence, and he was like, it doesn't really matter to me, I potentially would be the one kind of filling in more of that gap. That didn't happen in our conversation, but it's something I thought about when we were going to move in together. And I think the more that you can play to each other's strengths too in this conversation, the better. Like one of the listeners who came on the Patreon and did a story time was talking about how she totally lucked out because she and her girlfriend have opposite sort of likes in terms of the things that they enjoy doing. And that's true for me and Skyline in a lot of ways too. He likes to vacuum. I fucking hate it. I love to budget. He fucking hates it. There isn't everything that's like that, but it's nice that there are a few things. So it's nice to take the strengths where you can. And we haven't had to renegotiate much of that. Like I've talked about a couple of the things that we've renegotiated and that we do a little bit differently, but mostly talking through it beforehand really helped us like set off on a good path. And so I think the goal here is not this perfect scoreboard. It's not that everything works really well all the time. It's that you're able to continue to talk about it and nobody is kind of like silently carrying something that they're not talking about. Like the litter thing could have easily become something that I became resentful of because I hated doing it. And, I would rather be scooping every day. We talked about it and it reminded me, it was like a random conversation and it reminded me that I need to be more cognizant of anything like that that's coming up to be able to bring up in one of our kind of regular conversations about it. And to like continue to think about where your gaps are. Like one of my gaps that I work on that Skyline mentions to me is that I do not quickly open my packages. I have my own personal mailroom sometimes sitting in our entryway, and it's annoying. And it is absolutely annoying, and I need to get better at it. And that's something that I work on that bothers him. And I think that talking about those things is really, really important so that one person is not just sitting there silently fuming like, God damn it, her boxes are all over the entryway again. I'm tripping over them. Meanwhile, like, I don't mind stepping over a box. I know I'm a mess, but like, it is what it is. I'm working on it though. But I wouldn't know that that was bothering him if he didn't say something. And so I think that just having those conversations is so important. So, we're almost at an hour of talking about this. I am glad that I moved this into 2 parts. Jeez. Okay. So our next part is going to come in a couple of weeks and it's going to be about stuff that you can't really spreadsheet. Sharing a space, really merging your things, the emotional parts of living together, of moving in with someone. I'm really excited about that. I'm curious. Let me know in my DMs. If you're a patron, you can use the comment section. I would love to know the money thing or the chore thing that you wish you would nail down sooner or that you're thinking about most if you're in the process of about to move in with someone. Let me know, and I will talk to you next week.